is to make those classical economic models more sustainable and taking into consideration the environmental factors that also influence how our economy grows or shrinks. When we talk about the environmental economics, again, we can talk about ecosystem services. And if we didn't have that ecosystem, an example may be of pollination, if we didn't have bees, native pollinators as well as European honeybees in the North America, that would there would be a dramatic decrease in the ability to produce food. And that becomes an issue with economic growth and also with population growth. So there are many different examples of these environmental ecosystem services. And in this particular instance, in this diagram, you can see that they've estimated the cost of the value of those services at $153 trillion. So we have ecosystems that help to regulate climate, to purify air and water, even to enable recreation and food, to control pests, to control erosion, to form soil, and this is the example of the pollination of plants. We also have some other values in terms of maybe not traditional economic values. So we have generally the value of something that we use directly, but we also have existence value, the worth of knowing that something exists even though we never experience it ourselves. So for example, you might donate money to trying to save the Siberian tigers, even though you will never see one in its natural habitat. But just knowing that creature exists on the planet has a value to you. We have the option value, so that in future generations we can think about that they would be able to use this resource, so we're going to conserve it for future generations. We have the scientific value. I mentioned biodiversity as being important source for medical treatments, aesthetic, your emotions, educational value, and then culture value. So all of these can be taken into consideration when we look at environmental economics. When we look at projected models by environmental scientists, according to our economic growth, if we keep everything as the status quo, which means that we don't change anything, you'll see here that our resources are predicted in green here to decline quite dramatically. So that is general resources like fish and fresh water. And then what's going to happen if we have this dramatic decline in resources, then our ability to produce food and our industrial output will also, because we won't have the resources to make our goods that we buy, for example. And then population is also going to decline. And we also have a dramatic increase in pollution. And so that is not sustainable. If we look at and we change the way we think about economics and we say it's okay to have a leveling off of population, it's okay to have a leveling off of consumption. This is moving away from a more materialistic viewpoint and trying to produce goods that last longer, that can be recycled easily, and that generally we just reduce our amount of consumption, then we should be able to reach a sustainability. So here you can see that resources do not dramatically decrease, and then population and food production can stay relatively constant, and then pollution levels can also fall. And so this is a preferred model of sustainable practices over the one that we are currently expected to see. This also relates to climate change. So I can look at a couple of diagrams related to climate change. We have the cost of climate change under our moderate emissions or under our high emissions. We missed the boat on the low emissions. And so we can see that the costs to our economy is going to be huge. And so perhaps switching from the fossil fuels to renewable resources seems expensive now. But if we don't do that, it's going to be even more expensive in terms of damage to property, damages to the environment, to your health, and all kinds of other things. And so this is a scenario that we are under. And then another image that shows something very similar is if we have the gross domestic product. So this is amount of goods and services. Traditionally, if that's not growing, everybody panics. And we have just general panic because people aren't buying stuff and using it. And when we see how that is going to affect or be affected by climate change, we can see that our gross domestic product is going to decrease. So there's just going to be less goods and services in the future that we can produce because we're we're losing resources and we're having to negate all of the negative effects of climate change. So these are just some things that environmental economics takes into